All right, thank you very much, Mas Anggi, for the opening video. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the third global webinar with the topic Gender Equality, Diversity, and Social Inclusion in Education. This webinar is part of a partnership between Civil Society 20 Education, Digitalization, and Civic Space Working Group and Gender Equality and Disability Working Group. Thank you for all of you for attending the webinar today. My name is Desinta. I'm the Executive Director of SRI, an institution of research and education on gender issues in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I would say that this webinar is facilitated by English to Indonesian interpreter, and if necessary, Indonesian to English. So the participants can access this kind of facility by clicking the globe icon, and English Sign Language for Bahasa Indonesia is also available. We're honored to welcome some experts here. I would like to introduce them to you. First, we have Ibu Herni Ramlan Ningrum. She's the co-chair of C20 Indonesia that will give the opening remark on our webinar today. Maybe you can wave your hand so we can see you, Ibu Herni. Welcome. Hello. And how are you?
Good, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Okay. We also have our keynote speaker, Bapak Amih Al-Humami, the Director of Religious Affairs, Education and Culture on the Ministry of National Development Planning of the Republic of Indonesia, or Bappenas. And Bapak Amih will deliver his keynote speech with the topic Strengthening Access to Quality Education for Girls, Disabled, and Other Marginalized Learners. Hello, Pak. Welcome to this webinar.
Hello, thank you.
And it's also my pleasure to introduce our great speakers today. First, we have Ibu Dwi Yuliawati Faiz. She's the head of program of UN Women Indonesia and advisory panel members Women 20 Indonesia. Hello. And Hello. Then we have Judith De Souza from the Save the Children International. Judith is the Gender Equality Technical Advisor and Disability Inclusion Focal Point Asia Pacific. And we also have Dr. Zhu Harley, the representative of Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan Foundation. She's also the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs, College of Communication and Media Science, Yates University. We also have Nafisa Babu, the Director of Inclusive Education, Light for the World, Global Campaign for Education Group. Hello all, nice to meet you again here. And through this webinar, we aim to understand the challenges and opportunities regarding the issue of gender equality, diversity, and social inclusion in education pre, during, and post-COVID-19 pandemic. Together, and also we need to gather the insight and the perspective from the relevant experts and to share best practices from different contexts, methods, and countries with the public, and to increase the visibility of G20 and C20 Indonesia 2022 with the various global working partners in supporting the marginalized groups such as women, girls, children, and disability group in accessing and getting a quality education. And for those participating in this webinar, whether you are joining in the Zoom or YouTube channel, so if you have any question in the Q&A session later, please drop your question in the chat box. And again, I remind you that there will be the English to Indonesia interpreter, and if you necessary, also we have Indonesian to English interpreter. And audience can access this by clicking the globe icon in your screen. But if you have any difficulties, please let us know and our technical team will help you. And for all the panelists, I need to remind you as well that you will have around 10 minutes for the presentation, and we will notify you when you have 5 minutes left. All right, without waiting any longer, I would like to invite Ibu Herni to officially open our webinar today. Over to you, Ibu Herni.
Thank you, Mbak Desinta. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me warmly welcome all of you to this webinar on gender, disability, and social inclusion in education, digitalization, and civic space. This webinar is one of the webinar series that is formulated by the Education, Digitalization, and Civic Space Working Group of the C20 Indonesia. On behalf of the C20 Indonesia family, I would like to convey my gratitude to all speakers who are being able to come today, to Bapak Amih Al-Humami, as the Director of Religious Affairs, Education and Culture, Ministry of National Development Planning, to Ibu Dwi Yuliawati as Head of Program, United Nations Women Indonesia, who also advisory panel member of Women 20, to Judith Zosa as Gender Equality and Technical Advisor and Disability Inclusion Focal Point, Save the Children International, to Dr. Zoe Harley, representative of Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan Foundation, and to our moderator, Dr. Desinta Dwi Asriani as the Director of the Sri Institute. I'm glad that the time does not prevent us to meet each other today. As you know, the C20 Indonesia has been started since July last year, 2021, through intensive consolidation involving CSOs, not only in Indonesia, but also across the globe, beyond the 20 countries. We have carefully and inclusively created 7 working groups to ensure that the momentum of the G20 Indonesia presidency can be accessed by as many CSOs as possible. We want to ensure that all of us are heard and we have roles and space to deliver our call to the G20 leaders. During today's webinar, there are 3 essential words: education, digitalization, and civic space. The 3 concepts are entangled one to another, strengthen, and hopefully improving human lives. However, if it is not aligned with the human rights principles, the 3 words could prolong the gap on quality of education and reduce the freedom of expression. We all know that digital revolution is having and will continue to have a dramatic impact on education and civic space. Children around the world could obtain wider horizon from unlimited source of information. Yet at the same time, many children who have no access to technology can be left behind, fall into deeper poverty, and excluded from the impact of development. We have heard UNICEF Reachability Index shows that 3 out of 4 students who cannot be reached by remote learning option, including television, radio, and internet, are those who come from rural areas or those who come from poor households. Hello? Okay, I think I have problem with my connection. So, okay. As I said that UNICEF Reachability Index shows that 3 out of 4 students who cannot be reached by remote learning option, including TV, radio, and internet, are those who coming from the rural area or those who coming from the poor household. The learning crisis is already creating gap between the rich and the poor. About 825 million, according to the UNICEF, 825 million children around the world not learning the skill they need. The digital divide threatens to exacerbate it further. In terms of the civic space, one concept that is very important for all of us as the C20 members, digitalization is of course an opportunity to bring more canals to society for us to speak up, to voice ourselves. In certain cases, the opportunities brought by digital transformation have created the condition for civic space and civil society to thrive. Digital transformation has opened new spaces by online and offline, and it is connecting civic space at global level. supporting mass mobilization of social movements offline, and creating more dynamics and inclusive civic space marked by greater activism and engagement. However, we should not be forgotten too that digitalization can also create opposite impact. It is true that digital world has provided us space to express our interests, but that's only applied if the voice is not threatening to the power. And when it comes to disturbing elite power, digitalization is a double-edged sword, could be used to harm people, against human rights, and threatening civic space. We, the civil society organization, have witnessed the increasing threats and restriction to civic freedoms. Vulnerable minorities are precisely the groups that face greater risk online because of their gender, race, or sexual orientation. Women generally are more vulnerable to online harassment, and politically active women even more. Women journalists, for instance, are subject to voicing opinion, subject to harassment. When they are voicing their opinion differently, they are targeted because of their gender. Today, with all distinguished speakers, I believe that we will have more understanding on what is going on how we could collaboratively work around the issues of education, digitalization, and civic space. I really appreciate how this working group bring the intersectionality perspective or intersectionality lens to ensure that we're not leaving anyone behind. And then we count on your continuous participation, especially throughout the G20 presidency. Thank you very much and enjoy the discussion. Back to Mbak Desinta.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Herni, for giving the welcoming remark. Yeah, I think we all agree here that we should make this webinar as the strategic opportunity to deliver the concrete ideas regarding the effort to fill the gaps of inequality in education and society. Also, through this webinar, we can discuss more how to situate the digital transformation as a valuable moment, as another capital that can be utilized to handle the problem faced by marginalized, including women, girls, children, and people with disability. As mentioned, today's webinar is the third event of the overall series of global webinars related to the priority agenda. However, our webinar today will focus on the topic of gender equality, diversity, and social inclusion in education. And so talking about the social inclusion in education, COVID-19 pandemic give much lessons actually regarding how the pandemic had worsened the disparity, as the impact of the pandemic's economic struggle is also there is millions of children and youth who drop off the school. The extent to which we could manage the quality of our generation, especially those who are marginalized, become the very big question. And today, it's great that we have Bapak Ami Al-Humami, PhD, that has joined us to deliver his keynote speech about how to strengthen the access to quality education for girls, disabled, and other marginalized learners. And Bapak Ami is the Director for Religious Affairs, Education, and Culture on the Ministry of National Development Planning of Indonesia. And he did his bachelor studies in Philosophy and Sociology of Education at the Institute of Teacher Training and Education, Bandung, or we know as UPI. And he received a master's degree in cultural anthropology at the University of Indonesia. He did his second master studies in education policy at George Mason University, United States. And in 2011, he was awarded a PhD in social anthropology at the University of Sussex in UK. And it's a pleasure to have you here, Bapak Ami, and the next 20 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Ibu, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this forum. And it's very glad to have you all in this very strategic event discussing about the very important issue on education. And I will be talking about how Indonesia address the issue of equity, issue of quality of education by presenting some data and analysis. Maybe I would like to speak in mixed bahasa and also English. So as the most audience are Indonesian, and also I do believe also some coming from other countries. Ibu dan Bapak sekalian, I will share my screen here. Let me try first. Okay, I think the one of the most important things about education is how to provide education services which cover all citizens, as education is the right for the people regardless of their condition, for girls, for disabled, and for those living in remote area, also marginalized groups. And that is the responsibility of government and the state apparatus to provide equitable access for education for all those who are in the age of school, from early childhood education to elementary school up to the high school, if possible. And I think the Indonesian government has put what we call Vision 2045. It is projected that what Indonesia would likely be in 2045, indicated by as the country with a high income economy. It's about maybe 23,000 US dollars, and it cannot be done unless the government provide something important, what we call human development, and some very important pillars is about education and also health. And this is actually 4 pillars for Indonesia Vision of 2045, and we put the main pillar human development, and also how the country master science and technology, and this is in support of the sustainable economic development by accommodating all the very important elements, including how to protect and preserve the environment. And the most important thing is also how we promote inclusive development, equitable development, which benefit for all Indonesian people. And this is actually the conceptual framework of the human development as we put on the medium-term development plan 2020 and 2024. And this is mostly about how we conceptualize promoting Indonesian people with good education, with good health services, and by having good and quality education and quality health services, then we can develop quality human capital, which is important for supporting the development plan in the futures. And this is actually the main priority program we call improving equity and quality of education. It covers actually some important areas: improving and increasing the access of education for those who are in school age, and also determining the quality by providing good teachers. And that is why the government also pay attention very much to the school of education who are responsible for producing good teachers and qualified teachers with very good competence in pedagogical skills and also in subject content knowledge. And it's also cover how we promote the political decision made by Bapak Presiden Jokowi, what we call compulsory education, 12 years compulsory education. Those children from the age of 7 up to the age of 18 must be in the school system to guarantee that they will have the very basic skills and knowledge. If they want to continue their study into the tertiary education, then it's good if they can finish and graduate from high school. But if they also want to just go to the labor market, then they will actually acquire very basic skills and knowledge needed in the labor markets. And this is the very strategic policies in support of program improving quality and equity of education. We pay attention very much in the early childhood education. This is very important to prepare the children under the age before they enter to school, formal school, and also by expanding the access of education services from the age of 7, then they are they obliged to go to school to get the program 12 years compulsory education. And also we have also kind of affirmative policy for education by reaching the unreached group and those who live in the remote area and the disadvantaged communities. So this is also part of our concept, what we call inclusive education. We adopt the SDGs tagline, no one left behind. Then everyone, wherever they live, wherever they reside, then they are eligible to get to school, to have education for them. And actually, we also need to raise some problems, some issues, although some achievement can also, we can see in this figure that in terms of main years of schooling and the attainment of education for Indonesian people, it shows that from time to time, from years to years, across the actually during the one decade from 2010, main years of schooling of Indonesian people from the age of 15 years and above. Actually, in 2010, it's just 7.9 years. And then it has grown very steadily, and up to 2021, then it reached about 8.9 years. But this we just call about this. We just talk about the years of schooling. The main issue is about how we convert these years of schooling into the quality of learning, and the second one is the main problem of education in Indonesia. And while we promote the opportunity for having education for all Indonesians, then we also need to improve the quality by providing good infrastructure, good school, good teachers, and those who help students to have good learning processes in the school. Ibu dan Bapak sekalian, saya berpindah ke bahasa Indonesia, barangkali ada yang menerjemahkan. Yang menjadi masalah kemudian adalah capaian pendidikan di Indonesia masih menghadapi kesenjangan antar provinsi dan antar kabupaten di dalam provinsi. Sebagaimana terlihat di dalam slide ini. Mungkin kalau pada jenjang SMP tidak terlihat ada masalah karena capaian pendidikan antar provinsi dari Aceh sampai dengan Papua itu relatif tidak ada perbedaan antar kabupaten itu sebagaimana terlihat di sini. Tapi begitu menginjak ke sekolah menengah, SMA, SMK dan juga madrasah aliyah, maka di sini kelihatan sekali dan nanti akan bisa diketahui bahwa isu pokok kita terutama adalah anak-anak usia sekolah yang tinggal terutama di daerah-daerah terisolasi, terpencil, dan tertinggal yang kita sebut sebagai 3T itu. Nah, Papua terutama atau Maluku atau provinsi-provinsi yang ada di kawasan timur Indonesia. Di sini bisa kita lihat bahwa provinsi Papua paling senjang tingkat pencapaiannya, meskipun juga kita jumpai provinsi terutama yang padat penduduk di Jawa Barat atau di Jawa Tengah atau juga di Jawa Timur. Jadi misalnya kita ambil di Jawa Barat saja, itu rata-rata untuk capaian di jenjang menengah masih di bawah nasional. APK, partisipasi tingkat menengah itu mencapai 85%, tapi di Jawa Barat baru 78%. Sementara di antara Jawa Barat ada yang paling tinggi seperti di Ciamis mencapai 115% hampir, tapi juga ada yang tertinggal seperti di Sumedang baru 53%. Ini contoh mengapa kita isu inclusive development itu inclusive education itu sangat penting dan relevan untuk didiskusikan di forum ini. Selain itu juga ada isu kesenjangan antar pendapatan. Jadi keluarga-keluarga dari orang kaya yang pencapaian pendidikannya sudah sangat tinggi. Ini juga di tingkat sekolah menengah, senior secondary level. Jadi APK untuk keluarga-keluarga anak-anak dari keluarga kaya itu sudah 96%, sementara yang dari keluarga miskin baru 73%. Ini contoh kesenjangan, tapi kalau kita ikuti dari tahun ke tahun selama 1 dekade ini, ada pergerakan yang naik dari 1 tahun ke tahun berikutnya di antara kelompok yang berbeda pendapatan ini. Kita lihat misalnya di sini tahun 2000, kelompok yang dari keluarga miskin itu baru 23%, tapi 10 tahun kemudian sudah mencapai 73%, jadi berlipat-lipat kenaikannya. Yang paling cepat perkembangan membaik dari anak-anak dari keluarga miskin. Ini artinya intervensi kebijakan dan program dari pemerintah cukup membantu anak-anak yang dari keluarga tidak mampu itu. Kemudian dari sisi jenis kelamin, gender, kalau kita lihat slide ini, Ibu dan Bapak sekalian, hampir-hampir tidak temukan ada kesenjangan, ada perbedaan. Partisipasi baik untuk anak-anak perempuan maupun anak-anak laki-laki itu sama, dan mereka memperoleh hak yang serupa juga untuk menempuh pendidikan. Kita lihatlah di sini untuk semua jenjang, di SDK, di SMPK, atau juga di SMA. Kecuali SMA di tahun 2021 ini, itu ada sedikit saja perbedaan, mungkin sekitar 4% saja. Jadi dari sisi ini kita bisa mengatakan bahwa baik laki-laki maupun perempuan itu memperoleh kesempatan yang sama dalam mendapatkan layanan pendidikan. Yang isu yang lain adalah anak tidak sekolah, out of school children. Sebagian besar dijumpai di provinsi-provinsi yang padat penduduk, terutama di Jawa Tengah, sekali lagi Jawa Timur dan Jawa Tengah. Ini kalau di total itu kira-kira sekitar 43% dari total anak usia sekolah umur 7 sampai dengan 18 tahun. Kira-kira 53 juta. Nah, ada sekitar 3,9 juta itu anak tidak sekolah, drop out, dan sebagian besar adalah karena alasan biaya, alasan ekonomi. Mereka harus bekerja, dan sebagian juga alasan karena disabilitas. Nanti akan ditampilkan juga datanya. Ini kira-kira sebagian yang bisa kita himpun data-data tentang anak penyandang disabilitas yang tidak sekolah. Jadi total terutama lebih banyak dijumpai di jenjang menengah. Jadi dari total anak 3,9 juta itu sekitar ada 100.000 anak dengan anak penyandang disabilitas, dan sebagian besar itu berada di jenjang menengah. Mereka yang anak tidak sekolah dari penyandang disabilitas. Ini yang sekarang ini pemerintah memberikan perhatian yang sungguh-sungguh supaya tadi inclusive education betul-betul di layanan pendidikan betul-betul dinikmati oleh semua anak tanpa membedakan kondisi apa mereka gitu. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, ini penting sekali bagi kami terutama di Bappenas, dan untuk kemudian nanti dengan Kementerian Dikbud maupun juga Kementerian Agama untuk memastikan bahwa anak-anak penyandang disabilitas mendapatkan fasilitas yang sama sebagaimana juga anak-anak yang lainnya, termasuk juga kebutuhan untuk proses pembelajaran di sekolah dan kebutuhan untuk pembimbingan jika secara individual membutuhkan pendampingan gitu. Ibu dan Bapak sekalian, ini terkait dengan soal kualitas. Kita tahu bahwa PISA Indonesia masih sangat tertinggal gitu. Dan kalau kita lihat bahkan untuk di kota-kota yang paling bagus sekolahnya pun nilai PISA untuk apakah reading, matematika maupun juga sains itu juga masih tertinggal. Dan ini tantangan utama kita untuk memastikan bahwa kualitas itu memang dipengaruhi oleh ketersediaan sumber-sumber pembelajaran sekaligus juga guru-guru yang berkualitas. Nah, di antara yang menyumbang, kita tahu bahwa analisis sosial ekonomi itu memberi pengaruh besar pada kualitas pembelajaran dan berkontribusi pada kemampuan anak untuk mencapai academic achievement yang tinggi, termasuk juga pengalaman memperoleh pendidikan anak usia dini, 1 tahun prasekolah itu betul-betul berkontribusi besar pada capaian di PISA, baik untuk matematika, membaca maupun juga sains. Ini artinya bahwa kita perlu sebagai bangsa, sebagai negara, perlu mengupayakan dengan sangat sungguh-sungguh segala sumber daya yang dipunya untuk memastikan bahwa sumber-sumber pembelajaran, guru-guru yang berkualitas, dan juga sekolah-sekolah madrasah bisa digunakan semaksimal mungkin untuk meningkatkan capaian akademik yang baik. Yang terakhir, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, intervensi yang diberikan untuk sekolah-sekolah itu adalah bagi anak-anak yang tadi tinggal di daerah terpencil yang berasal dari keluarga tidak mampu diberikan beasiswa berupa Kartu Indonesia Pintar. Ini untuk memastikan bahwa tadi mendukung wajib belajar 12 tahun ada di sistem persekolahan dan bisa belajar. Juga ada biaya operasional bagi sekolah-sekolah, pelatihan-pelatihan guru untuk meningkatkan kompetensi pedagogi maupun juga penguasaan mata pelajaran, dan juga untuk memperbaiki sarana prasarana sekolah dan madrasah melalui pembiayaan di kementerian, anggaran dari kementerian, atau juga dana alokasi khusus yang didedikasikan untuk melengkapi sarpras dan juga peralatan serta mendukung penyediaan sumber-sumber pembelajaran sehingga kualitas pendidikan menjadi membaik. Saya kira ini yang bisa saya sampaikan, Ibu dan Bapak sekalian, mudah-mudahan membawa manfaat untuk kita semua. Thank you very much and all this for my presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for your great speech, Papa Ami. So some point that I can highlight here are, there is a priority program delivered by the national government of in Indonesia to not only improve the quality of education, but also the equity in education. So there is some initiative to improve the quality of inclusive education as our spirit to not leave behind. But there are still some issues that we need to discuss, especially in the today webinar, like the disparity education participation based on the region. And this disparity is also intersected with other aspects, including social economy, gender. However, as shown in the presentation, that based on the gender, women and men seems to get the equal opportunity to participate or to get the education in the formal education. However, maybe we can also discuss more that how the young women actually to get the higher education, they may still face certain challenges. And also in the context of disability group, the participation also decreased when it comes to the high school. So that's why there is that's very important to discuss the inclusive education, especially in the today webinar. Okay, thank you very much once again for Bapak Ami. Before we continue our discussion and hear the presentation from our speakers, why don't we take the picture together, because Ibu Herni and Bapak Ami are still here. Maybe we can open our video and take the picture together, and Mas Andi maybe will have to take the picture to give the sign or to count 1, 2, 3 like that.
Okay, all 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay.
Okay, it's done for, I think we have 3 page here. All right. Can we continue? All right. Yeah. We will continue our discussion and hear our speakers. So yeah, talking about the gender equality, we know that it's not only about the women issues, but also the women education also creates the positive impact in increasing economic productivity and gaining participation in the labor market, increasing earnings and improving societal health and well-being. But again, another question is how the position of women's and girls empowerment in this kind of situation, yeah, especially in the digital transformation. So it's great that we have the speaker that will elaborate the issue of girls and women empowerment in digital era. We have Ibu Dwi Yuliawati Faiz. So Ibu Dwi is the head of a program of UN Women Indonesia and advisory panel member W20 Indonesia. And she will deliver her presentation entitled by Girls and Women Empowerment and Representation in the Education, Digitalization, and Civic Space Sectors. Okay, the next 10 minutes is yours, Ibu Dwi.
Thank you, Ibu Desinta. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are. Selamat sore, Pak Ahmi. Selamat sore, Mbak Erni. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Dwi. I'm the advisor to W20 Indonesia, as well as the UN Women Indonesia head of programs. I have a very tall order in my next 10 minutes to share about how gender equality interlink with education, digitalization, and civic space. I try as much as I can to cover all, but I would like to focus on a very hard and becoming a root cause of all this inequality, which is discrimination. I'll start by probably as an eye-opener for us all to see the numbers, or because sometimes numbers speak louder than words. Sometimes people quote bombastically about the gaps or about the gaps in terms of numbers and the impact and the cost. But beyond that, what's there? So this is just a snapshot of the situation currently. So gender digital divide persists irrespective of overall ICT access levels. So all countries in the world, including B20 countries, economic performance, income levels, or geographic location. So it is real. Gender digital divide persists, real, it's across the globe. And there's also an interesting quote by World Economic Forum. This is prior to the pandemic. By 2022, 60% of global GDP will be digitized. So this 60% represents something that women most probably will not be able to be equally represented. So this is the interconnected of component of digital gender divide. These issues have been brought forward by W20 since 2017 in Germany, 2018 in Argentina, in Japan 2019, 2020 in Saudi Arabia, and Italy last year, and most probably in the current W20 presidency. First of all, this is about access of digital technology and the internet. There's a study saying that 300 million fewer women than men have access to a mobile internet. This is from the study of GSMA in 2019. And also the issue of development of the skills needed and participation in the design. Participation in the design is somewhat left in the conversation about skill, as if increasing the skill, digital literacy skill and education is the panacea of the gender gap. It is not. So across the globe, proportion of women graduates from STEM is 36%. 33.5% in Eastern and Southeastern Asia. This is based on the UN Women Study. This is very interesting. Only 15 women software writers in the world. So even the AI, even the algorithm are gender biased based on this number. Leadership and decision-making in digital technology is also a problem. It's also a compounded issue in digital gender divide. So this is not only about access and use. This is also about skill and also about leadership. Just a very visual graphic of where we are in terms of percentage female graduates in STEM. Software is male-dominated world, as I mentioned. So in the context of pandemic, people often say that the online or the digital space gives plenty of opportunity for women, for every citizen across the globe, including women and young women, to be participated as active citizens. Is it? So open civic space is the key for inclusive, spaces where people can be participated meaningfully in the public debate. But we do have some critical questions. Do women in their diversity can participate meaningfully into the discussion? Who lead? Who speak? Is all male panel still a problem? Are those discussions in the space, in the public space, are dominated by men and representing only a limited view of the world? Safe channels and vibrant and diverse media landscape. This is again very contextual. Whenever there's a freedom of expression, there theoretically there should be a freedom of vibrant public debates. But is it? Is digital space and safe space a safe space for women? How about the media in general? How about the cases of GBV being reported? Can survivors feel safe? Can they be able to have all the people, the parties concerned to their suffering accountable using media and not being victimized and blamed? The third condition that allow people to freely organize for collective action. We heard, and I also hear Ibu Herni quite very clearly about the rights defenders. Is there hostility towards women's rights defenders? How about youth activists? Youth activists use digital space quite prominently. Are they safe? Are they threat of all forms, including online or tech-facilitated violence, faced or experienced by them? Is there any regulation protecting them from such cases? So let's deep dive into the bias and norms. We heard about gap. We heard about inclusive education and how people from diverse background, women, women with disability, girls with disability can access an inclusive space. And we heard about Indonesia has achieved parity in education at some level. But does it really say something about the digital economy and civic space? There is a leaky pipeline where women and girls who dropped out of the pipeline from education, from very early in the education, until the entering the workforce, until they're becoming, exceeding the labor force. And we also need to know that civic space is gendered. Not many women participated in the public debate. The phenomenon of all male panel are still quite, quite common. You can see visually in all the posters of webinar, many of them are male, many of the speakers are male. Women have limited access and the space is predominantly occupied by men. What caused this? So yes, education parity is important, but I think we should look beyond education in school. We should also see whether stereotype and diverse role of women is being communicated. It's in the curriculum, is in the way teachers to students and student to students relationship is conducted, whether it is also the responsibility of or having to do with the gender equitable relationship in the household. But mind you, perhaps the reason why women or girls are not, choosing STEM is because they're told to do so. They're being in a ecosystem where women who work in tech industry is very rare, where perhaps the role and the task daily to do unpaid care work hinders them to do reskilling or to access reskilling and upskilling in STEM, not only in school, but outside of the school, because this is the reality of women all over the world. To me, it is like an iceberg phenomenon. What we see as a low participation in the spaces, digital economy or civic space, basically, even if it is driven by education, it is also driven by bias. But we also see that the dimension of affordability and access plays an important role side by side with the gender bias. There are 900 million people live in locations where internet prices higher than ITU benchmark, which is 1 gigabyte should not cost more than 2% of monthly income. So it is interesting because all over the world, it is not only Indonesia. Imagine women with less income, they probably doesn't have access to affordable internet. Gender norms. We talk about inclusive space. Inclusive space needs also to be safe. Our study highlights the likelihood of women and girls experiencing ICT and online GBV during the pandemic due to probably frequent use of the online space. This altered the way women and girls use online platforms. They're probably not willing to come forward and hindering the benefits from online education and economic participation and civic space particularly. Another issue is availability. This is the hidden part of the iceberg. And even digital infrastructure development is still challenges for women. I heard a lot about the discrepancy between rural-urban divide. It is real. To access and use. In many contexts, even the open civic space is simply unavailable. So at the very top is the perpetuation of gender bias, discrimination, and violence. Inequality is shown by either gap in numbers, as I mentioned, or discrimination, just blatantly gender pay gap, or inequality in education. And at the very worst form of discrimination is violence. Bias can also enter artificial intelligence, in algorithm, and in machine learning due to underrepresentation of women. We see the number of only 15% of software developers are women, right? So this causes also bias in how machines produce information. So it is important to also see the alignment between the priorities of C20 and W20 issues. We put so much emphasis in discrimination and equality. This is quite uncommon for all W20 priorities since its inauguration in 2017. So it's we put so much of emphasis on promoting equality and discrimination. And then the second one is economic inclusion. So not only about MSMEs owned by women, but their economic inclusion. Disability inclusion, this is also for the first time W20 discussed openly and put forward in priority issues of women with disability and rural women. We also put priorities on gender equitable health response, including the services for sexual reproductive health that's often overlooked due to the pandemic. So just to be very brief and providing you with an actionable or focus for actionable recommendation, we should be broaden our mind, not only fixated into schooling as the only education that is available for women. In reality, women in rural areas probably dropped out. What about the lifelong learning? What about the reskilling? What about finding ways so women is educated on a certain issues, regardless of their disconnection with the formal education. Promote diverse portrayal of role. Again, expanding the notion of education. Have we educate the public and the media? Have we really look at the curriculum? And have we do behavioral change campaign in addition or beyond awareness raising? Because awareness raising will not change the way we behave and also understanding the bias and stereotype. It is mainly because young women are lacking the role model around them, that they don't see many women working in the digital space, for example, or being in the civic space and be free of talking their opinion. Digital safe space is needed. We also hear many cases like application designer that just resign due to the sexual harassment in the workplace. Digital space, including the tech industry, should be safe also for women, so they can benefit and also they can participate in a democratic space that is so-called digital. And lastly, I think I will be hearing the same notion about this. All this recommendation needs to be holistic and needs to be transformative. So it is probably beyond policy framework. Yes, it is about working together with tech industry, with providers of education services outside of the schooling. And it is into mobilizing our collective action. C20 is the best platform to do that because it can mobilize, movement of civil society around the globe. And imagine if the voice is louder, then all the notion about this discrimination will be probably get into the G20 leaders' attention. So I will end here, and I will say that in addition to recover together, recover stronger, we have to recover together equally. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Dwi, for the very powerful presentation. Some interesting point that I can highlight here, like as mentioned by Ibu Dwi, that try to discuss the gender equality that interlink to the issue of education and digitalization. That gender digital divide not only happens in the G20 countries, but also all over the world. There are still some challenges experienced by women regarding the access and participation in the technology. And although some women or some girls have the opportunity to participate and access the technology, sometimes they still have the challenge to improve their skill to utilize the space in the digital era, and also to improve their leadership performance and the decision making in the digital technology. And also another critical question that's very interesting about the gender and the open civic space, like bias and the norms lead the technology to be still understood as the main words, that beside the low participation of women in technology, women also often become the object of violence in the online space. That's why in the presentation, Ibu Dwi raised the idea about the focus of action, include the inclusive education, like long learning, also promote the diverse portrayal roles, and promote the safe place in the online space, and how to provide the holistic transformative approach. Also, maybe we can also discuss more about how to define the digital space based on the women's experience and knowledge. Okay, we then move to talk more about the inclusive education issue from our second speaker. We have Judith de Souza. She will deliver her presentation with the proposed topic about empowering children with disabilities to access education. Judith comes with 2 decades in sustainable development, specializing in gender mainstreaming and social inclusion, in particular gender transformative approaches, addressing key issues in program management, policy, and strategy development, and capacity building. She's currently the Asia Pacific Gender Equality Technical Advisor and Disability Inclusion Focal Point for Save the Children International. Judith also has worked across the spectrum on sustainable development, climate change, travel, indigenous development, social and economic empowerment in South and Southeast Asia. Again, it's a pleasure to have you here, Judith, and let's us hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see that there is sign language interpretation, so I will try to go very slowly also. So, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'll be basically talking about the approach Save the Children has in terms of understanding inclusive education. And recently we decided on 3 breakthroughs that we want to achieve by 2030. And in the breakthroughs, we have education as a very important point, where we say that all children should learn from quality basic education. And in terms of that, we are focusing on children who are most impacted by inequalities and discrimination. In our approach to inclusive education, we are really focusing on all forms of inclusion, because generally when we talk about inclusion, we really focus a lot on disability. But for us, intersectionality is a very, very important issue. So we look at not just disability, but we also look at children with different sexual identities and orientations. So in terms of defining our ambition, we have 4 pillars that we endeavor to address. First is be the voice, where we really want to hear the voices of children who are at the risk of discrimination, and we want to amplify their voices so that their voices can actually be the change that we're looking for. And this is how we will do it. We will use a socio-ecological model to really look at what are the traditionally excluded identities within the education space. We want to invest in structures and systems and building capacities, and we want to encourage an environment that really is based on awareness, respect, and sensitivity. We also look at being the innovator in the sector, where we want to address barriers to access and learning by creating more inclusive spaces, by looking really at working between communities and schools, building capacities and learning on the lessons that we have gained through our experience. In achieving results at scale, we want to strengthen policies by really having a very local to global focus on our advocacy and policy work, and supporting education authorities and institutions to implement whatever laws and policies that they have to make it more inclusive. We also look at building more partnerships of like-minded organizations, sharing information and influencing others. So based on this as a position on inclusive education, I'm going to share with you a few good practices that we have been able to see across the globe. And mind you, a lot of these practices have actually happened during the COVID years, because as we know, in many of our countries, life still has to continue because of economic and poverty reasons. So we have taken all precaution and taken all care and consideration while we have carried out our activities in the field. So in many of these best practices, you will see that we've really looked at integrating our position, our 4 pillars into our programming. So for example, in Uganda, we looked at making classrooms, making schools more accessible. We looked at training community inclusion teams and school inclusion teams. And this is where we come to our community and school partnership. We've looked at also adapted sports, because sports is such a thing, and we've seen many times in the playground that maybe children who have a disability cannot really involve where the other children are playing. We have trained teachers and trained district education staff and other organizations on the use of the Washington Group Clusters. In Nepal, what we have done is that we have, through our early childhood care and development program, identified the children who are within the age group and work with the teachers to go and really work with the children, spend around 4 hours per day in bringing the children up to speed with their education. Also, the children are given the disability ID cards and the social security allowance. And this is done in partnership with the government, where the government matches the teacher's salary, and the government, along with the support of SAFE, have developed a homeschooling strategy. In Mozambique, we really looked at capacity building and coordination, where we've worked with the Ministry of Education and the primary school educators, especially the administration and the management. And we've had a workshop on mechanisms for identification and screening of children through the Social Services Department in Gaza. In Turkey, we really worked with refugee children, and where we've had webinars, where we're using sign language, which I think is an amazing step that we've taken over the last few years, and look really at building our education training program, focusing on reasonable accommodation, privileges, and discrimination. Now, in terms of education, sometimes we only think education is about school learning, but it's also about life skills. So what we've seen in the case of Thailand, Save the Children has worked with the government, the Ministry of Public Health, and the Ministry of Education in 15 primary schools to improve children's knowledge on water safety and build their survival swimming skills. And this was all done by creating an inclusive environment, working with children with disability or special education needs, so that they learn from each other and they learn together. And this culminated in a special education book that was endorsed by the Education Bureau, where the director of the Special Education Bureau wrote the preface. And you can see up here the manual itself with all very, pictures that appeal to the children, that really talk about swimming and the safety around it. In Malawi, we've supported the rehabilitation of 3 primary schools to make them inclusive education, because as I said, we really believe in inclusive education. Of course, there are situations where there are special schools available for children, but it really is very contextual. It depends upon whether the parents can afford it or not. Again, in Malawi, we worked with the Ministry of Education to develop government-approved compendium of inclusive education policy statements and supported them to transcribe the National Inclusive Education Strategy into Braille, so that it's more accessible to the people and especially to the community of people with disability. So these are some of the best practices that we've done. Of course, there have been challenges. There have been times where we feel that things have not taken place. But as we say, we are all in the process of learning, and we're all in the process of trying to make a better world and trying not to leave anybody behind. Over the last few years, we have also developed a lot of policies, a lot of toolkits, a lot of guidelines that are available on our website and can be accessed by everyone and can be used by everyone. So these are some of them. We have a child-friendly disability inclusion policy. We are currently working on a child rights and disability inclusion policy. We have guidelines on inclusive child safeguarding, infant and young children's feeding. So in our entire programming cycle, whether it starts from early childhood to youth, we are really looking at how do we look at children with disability and youth with disability so that we can ensure that every child has quality basic education. In advocacy, we've been doing a lot of local to global, and we worked with the Human Rights Council 47 last July, where we provided inputs, and we've also delivered a joint statement on the behalf of several organizations on this. We've had a lot of discussions in Kosovo. We worked a lot with in the US itself to incorporate and strengthen disability inclusion in the Global Learning Loss Assessment Report. In China, we've worked in the development of the revised regulations of the education of persons with disability. This was a very interesting process with them, and we finally got out a regulation that was extremely inclusive and looked at inclusive education rather than segregated education. I would like to talk a little bit about the Philippines experience. They had an accelerated recipient of an internal grant where they really worked a lot on with other organizations and part of a group where they looked at building a policy for inclusive education for learners with disabilities, where they also had formative research and used the evidence generated from the programming and the research to inform the development of the policy itself and really work with a number of different stakeholders. They also developed a resource book on how do we engage with children with disabilities. It includes guidelines, practical tips on different activities, and this was done in consultation with different partner organizations of people with disabilities and piloted. So these are some of the efforts that we have done. What we're asking from this webinar and from all the different interactions that we're having globally, where we are engaging with governments and we are engaging with higher authorities, that those with special education needs, they must have access to regular schools. And these regular schools should have a more child-centered pedagogy approach, which is capable of meeting these needs. We're also asking for more inclusive orientation because this is the way to effectively combat discriminatory attitudes, building a more inclusive society and achieving education for all. Because separating our children with disabilities from their peer groups is discriminatory and it limits individual life chances. Also, that we've seen in many reports that are now emerging that exclusion prevents individuals from developing skills that are necessary to improve employment opportunities or income generation, contributing to cycles of poverty and stagnant economies. And we've seen the rate of returns. If children with disabilities do continue with school, what is the rate of return at the economic level? So in conclusion, we say funding an inclusive education system, it does not require additional resources. It just really talks about redistributing the resources that are available in the education sector so that our education systems can become more robust and more strengthened in terms of ensuring all our children, irrespective of how they look, the way they walk, the way they see, their intersectionality issues, they are all able to gain quality education. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, Judith. It's very interesting, especially when you show the several good practices in inclusive education in some countries. And you also try to show how the regular schools with inclusive orientation are the most effective way to combat the discriminatory attitudes among the children themselves. And then how we still, or the most important thing that we need to discuss about the challenge, how to work together with some relevant institution and the government to provide the inclusive education system. Because as you say, that separating disabled learners from their non-disabled peer group is something that's not productive, because it can limit the individual life change and produce an unfair or unjust society. I think it's very, very interesting. Thank you very much. And next, we will hear our third speaker that will raise the issue of intersectionality. I think this is very relevant also to our society. We have Dr. Zoe Harley that will deliver her presentation. The proposed topic is eradicating intersectional gender discrimination in the education sector and creation of technology enhanced learning. Dr. Zoe is the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs in the College of Communication and Media Sciences at the Zayed University, Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Originally from United Kingdom, she earned her PhD in Technology Enhanced Learning from Lancaster University, UK. And after growing up in London, Dr. Zoe has spent her adult professional life in the global south and has worked in Malaysia, Brunei, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates. Dr. Zoe also teaches undergraduate courses in social media, and her research developed intersectional feminist theorizing of technology, enhanced learning, and the post-digital condition. She also has published articles in leading academic journals, including New Media and Society, Feminist Media Studies, Social Media and Society, Information Communication and Society, Post-Digital Science and Education, and Visual Communication, and I think many things. All right, we can hear the presentation from Dr. Zoe now. So the next 10 minutes is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that introduction. And yeah, good afternoon to everybody, to all our honoured attendees. And thank you very much to the other speakers for raising some important issues that I think I'll also be echoing. So as I was introduced, I teach at Zayed University in the United Arab Emirates. But I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan Foundation to discuss the crucial topic of eradicating discrimination in the education sector. Education is one of the Khalifa Foundation's top priorities, and it's an organization which strives to support deprived communities, as well as to promote gender equality and inclusion for disabled children. Examples of the Foundation's initiatives include building of the Sheikh Khalifa Secondary Co-ed School in Mombasa, Kenya. And this is a school which is currently ranked top in their region and 25th in the country. Another example is the partnering with the UN's Relief and Works Agency in Gaza, where the Khalifa Foundation provide critical support and funding for 2 schools. This investment in co-education is crucial, since we know that boys are also at risk of not completing secondary school. Nevertheless, as the previous speakers have highlighted, it is girls who are generally the victims of gender discrimination. So my work, teaching and research focuses on the role of technology-enhanced learning in girls' and women's empowerment. To outline the issues of gender inequality today, I will talk about technology-enhanced learning, or TEL, and its impacts on the intersectional challenges facing women and girls, as well as precisely what do we mean by empowerment, since empowerment is such a fuzzy term with varying definitions and implications. I will briefly make the case for a gender capabilities approach and discuss a snapshot of a case study. And I will also offer some take-homes and recommendations. Now, as everyone is aware, COVID-19 has been a global disruptor that has seriously impacted and deepened already existing disparities. In education, the shift to the emergency delivery of online courses, was assumed as relatively painless in some contexts. And this is, those contexts where there is high-speed internet access, high rates of mobile phone and laptop ownership. And big tech has profited enormously during this period and seems to be ushering in a new paradigm of technology-enhanced learning. However, and conversely, in other contexts where there are deep-seated gender inequalities, limited access to Wi-Fi, hardware, and consistent access to electricity, the situation was, of course, very, very different. And as an example, I recently visited Socotra, Yemen, and the photograph that you can see before you was taken at a university in Socotra, Yemen. And my job was to advise young women university students on becoming social media entrepreneurs. But after being there just for a few days, I quickly realized the naivety of my advice, considering the limited Wi-Fi connectivity in Socotra, Yemen, and the deep gender disparities of their context. So I therefore emphasize how important it is to appreciate that the digital divide is not only about tech infrastructure and mobile devices, but it's also a matter of cross-cutting systemic intersectional gender inequalities. Gender inequalities, as the previous speakers have highlighted, are embedded into technology. Gender inequalities are embedded into learning environments and also the home. Domestic and public spheres are gendered places which continue to be shaped by patriarchal ideologies and enduring misogyny. However, there's actually nothing new about any of this. And the notion of the girl effect, which is the idea that investment in education, skills, and labor of young women is the key to stimulating economic growth and reducing poverty in the global south, is something that people have been talking about for decades. For the last 2 decades at least, investing in female empowerment has been a development strategy of the World Bank, the IMF, and part of the corporate global responsibility agenda of corporations such as Nike and Goldman Sachs. It reflects the broader rise of discourses surrounding gender equality and women's empowerment as development objectives. The UN Development Programme's publication of the Gender-Related Development Index and the Gender Empowerment Measure since 1995 in its annual Human Development Report arguably have had a profound impact in raising attention on gender inequality in international policy debates. Okay, nevertheless, the categories of measurement used to define women and girls' empowerment across a wide and very varying range of contexts has tended to routinely operate according to universal definitions of women's rights. And this fails to include important non-economic and intersectional dimensions of decision-making power, both at the household level and over women and girls' bodies, sexuality, learning, and technology. Alternatively, the capabilities approach highlights the intersectional gender factors which impact on learning. The feminist philosopher Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach includes the categories of social, political, economic, intellectual, and physical functions of gender flourishing. In terms of technology-enhanced learning, it's crucial to remember that although technologies are assumed to be neutral, they contain inherent biases of the societies that design and produce them. But the gender capabilities framework is really useful because it links women and girls' situated opportunities and freedoms from a normative starting point of functions that could be and should be developed to expand potentially more empowering capabilities. Now, in terms of TEL specifically, online philosopher Penelope Rush argues that in the 21st century, we need to update our understanding of foundational concepts in the online learning environment. And this includes ideas about presence, about personalization, self-presentation, as well as different understandings about mind, self, and others. So therefore, Rush is advocating for discontinuous or disruptive theorizing to challenge the presumed continuity between traditional concepts and their relevance to the digital online learning sphere. So I would argue that we need to do the same when thinking about gender, intersectional factors, and technology-enhanced learning. We need to be asking the crucial question of how technology can be developed to promote empowering gender capabilities. And this requires a series of collective and situated practices for expanding women's opportunities, rights, and gender equality. To illustrate very briefly how intersectional gender functions could be discussed, I share this snapshot of a case study involving female students from my university in the UAE who have physical and intellectual disabilities, who met with leaders, educational leaders and ministers to discuss a range of issues and suggest solutions for capabilities to be developed in their context. And these were some of the takeaways from this case study that came out of these discussions and the perspectives of a range of stakeholders. But the point here is not the specific issues raised at this event and in this case, but the importance of situated dialogue and the promotion of women's voices and perspectives. And so some of the other speakers before me spoke about the importance of amplifying women's voices. And I would say, amplifying underrepresented women, women who have physical and intellectual disabilities. We need to take their voice and perspective seriously and train them to be able to participate in civic space. So in summary, implications of the TEL gender capabilities approach suggests that, as the other speakers have mentioned, we need investment, not just in technology, but in teacher training and pedagogies that will bring about gender equality. And this should not necessarily be funded by the tech companies themselves, because they have a vested interest in their products being disseminated throughout the education system globally. And we also need strong policies that promote gender equity and inclusivity. And we need strong checks and legislation to monitor the tech platforms and to monitor how the resources are being implemented within all levels of schooling. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to this for TEL or for pedagogy. They need to be contextualized. And I would say this is the same in terms of physical capabilities. So our assistive technologies and learning spaces need to be made more inclusive, safer, and more productive of empowering capabilities for the learners involved. And in terms of the intellectual capabilities, we need to provide more opportunities for collaboration, and we need to train people with disabilities or people suffering gender oppression how to voice and articulate these issues, and also develop more situated initiatives. So the take-homes from this are that neither economic funds, technology enhanced learning, gender empowerment, or inclusivity quotas alone are sufficient. Each of these things is important, but they're not enough in and of themselves. So TEL gender capabilities should be allowed to emerge and applied according to context. We need to start thinking about technology in blended terms, not that there's a division between offline or online. We don't need to choose one or the other. So we need to be thinking much more about the blended learning spaces and how they intersect. And above all, we need to really be listening to the voices and perspectives of underrepresented women and girls. But we also need to address the systemic root causes of global social inequalities arising from debt, from unregulated platform marketplaces, and patriarchal ideologies. So with the world leaders preparing to meet, the upcoming G20 is a key moment for them to support gender quality education by transforming educational systems, particularly those in needy contexts, and by providing safe, equitable learning for all. We need to move forward in a much quicker way to remove the barriers that stand between women and girls and their fundamental right to a good education. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zoe, for your very interesting presentation. But I think her idea also emphasized the previous speaker about we need to pay attention more regard to the digital divide. That is not only about the technology infrastructure and mobile device, but also the matter of systemic gender inequalities. So there are intersectional influences that lead the gender inequality in technology, as she mentioned, include the religion, social economical issues, infrastructures, culture, etc. That's why we need to invest not only the infrastructure technology, but also in the pedagogy system, how the education system also can support the need to create the gender equality itself. And we need to raise the voice of marginalized people, including women, girls, and other people with disability to get their input, based on their experiences. So we can describe, or we can create and provide the more equal environment. Okay, thank you very much. And now we move to our fourth speaker, Nafisa Babu. She will present the topic of assistive technology for enhancing children and youth with special needs right to education, employment, and civic space. Nafisa is a qualified speech language therapist and audiologist with a master in inclusive education. Her focus area include research advising on IE policies and practices, advocacy work, as well as training teachers, education, officials, and communities on IE. Nafisa has 12 years of experience working in the most complex communities and countries to foster a more inclusive society. Nafisa serves on the board of the Global Campaign for Education and the Technical Advisory Committee of the Inclusive Education Initiative, and is the former chair of the Inclusive Education Task Group of the International Disability and Development Consortium. She also authored several publications, including Leave No Child Behind, Impact in the Early Years. Okay, then the next 10 minutes is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everybody from across the world. Assalamu alaikum. So we've heard from so many of the speakers previously about the value and massive disadvantage that girls and boys with disabilities experience in accessing education. There are about 240 million children with disabilities worldwide, and about 49% are more likely to never ever attend school. The gaps in access and learning have really widened during the pandemic because many countries around the world employed technologies such as online lessons, TVs, and radios to promote education continuity. However, 40% of these countries, especially the poorer countries, did not provide any specific support for children with disabilities during the COVID-19 crisis. So worldwide, we have heard from many speakers already that many children, many students, and more so have not benefited from online education because they didn't have access to technology. But students with disabilities have been even more disadvantaged because they often come from the poorest households. So having the necessary equipment, internet access, data, accessible material, adaptable content, or even just the human support of having a parent, a sibling to help them, really that was lacking. So they really struggled to benefit from online programs. And the majority did not and because of the cost of assistive technology and software was also so exorbitantly high, it posed an additional challenge. And sadly, in many of the countries that like for the world works in, and also the global campaign for education is, these low-income countries, many times people argue when resources are scarce, financial resources are few, that it's actually, they would rather see it as a better investment to invest in those who do not have a disability. And this is really a sad situation because countries lose up to 7% of their gross domestic impact due to the exclusion of persons with disabilities. The reality is that the lack of accessible learning and teaching material and low levels of confidence or know-how of teachers has always been one of the biggest barriers to the right to inclusive education for girls and boys with disabilities. So ICT in education has, however, the potential to hack these barriers. During the pandemic, we saw also many examples of countries using their resources to make learning more inclusive and accessible. And the great example of Bangladesh comes to my mind, where the government really invested in developing an ecosystem to promote accessible learning and teaching material for students who are blind. They worked with publishers to make textbooks accessible and also provide assistive technology such as audio recorders and braille displays computers to students. In countries like mine, like South Africa, where I'm based, NGOs have also used the technology to train early childhood development practitioners using smartphones and WhatsApp. And this has been really great and innovative, and they will now continue this approach moving forward because it's been so successful. The reality is that most teachers in the world do not know or completely understand the concept of inclusive education because of the history of people preferring to have children in special schools opposed to having them in the regular classroom. And let alone they also struggle with the use of technology. And we know that digital literacy in low-income countries is very low. And also the know-how of how to use technology in the classroom is also not quite there. But by optimizing the use of ICT in the classroom and beyond, teachers could more easily adapt their lessons in a way so that content and exercises can be presented in different ways for children to be able to participate in the learning and teaching process. You can produce material either visually or through audio recording. And so those are all make things a lot more accessible. The technology that can also provide students with maybe cerebral palsy or no functional speech with a voice, using voice output applications or picture-based communication. Video calling and video recording also allows students to use sign language, like we have our lovely sign language interpreter here, interpreting for us today, but they can record their responses in that way. And curriculum material can now be produced in accessible formats such as Braille, audio, or EPUB format, where you can adjust the text size and also the contrast. And this is also helpful for students who have dyslexia. We also know that voice commands and using switches or pointers can help students who have physical problem with their hands to physically manipulate a computer and control it. Unfortunately, in low-income countries, most countries generally, only 5 to 15% of people with disabilities really have the assistive technology that they need. And we know in universities, only 30 to 44% of universities have access to even assistive technology. And some of you might know that lots of these assistive technologies, such as JAW, are exorbitantly expensive and unaffordable for many. However, thanks to recent advances in technology, some brought on by the pandemic, others have always been in development. There are access features within our day-to-day technology that make communication and access to the curriculum so much easier. You've seen that in recent years, our Zoom now has automated captioning. If you go on YouTube, you can also get automated captioning. These are all technologies that weren't there necessarily before. And if you go on your Microsoft Word, you can also see there's a read out loud function. And also on when you read a PDF, it can automatically read it out loud for you. So these are amazing advances. However, few people really know about the built-in access functions in their mobile phones, tablets, and laptops. It is lovely to see how teachers in the past 2 years have been so creative about recording stories or lessons on their phone and send it via WhatsApp to students during the pandemic. The idea is more to promote universal access and universal design. And it's a trend that many IT companies have been taking up and been following. Many access technology provide access technology that was previously very expensive is now free and built in, but we need to make sure that people are aware of this and have training in how to use it. A recent study was done in Kenya, and 71% of visually impaired students said that having a smartphone helped them a lot to access education because of its capabilities and also having access to technologies and screens such as screen readers and online libraries. There's more and more recognition as we move forward that learning aided by technology is a very good solution in humanitarian crises. These digital learning platforms can offer many opportunities for students with disabilities if they are designed with their needs in mind from the onset. So my late father, who was blind, he had the foresight for me to, and encouraged me to use technology and learn more about it when I was young. And that was back in the days when we had these big computers. And it was through technology that it really enabled me to have an education and be a lifelong learner. It's also that technology that enables me to have and pursue a career. And it's also that technology that enables me to lead an active life in my community and share my opinions on social media and about issues that I feel passionate about. It really has the potential to be a big enabler and equalizer for persons with disabilities. In Uganda, Light for the World has a Disability Inclusion Academy, and where we train up young graduates with disabilities and arm them with a smartphone and some advocacy skills and resource on an app that's called 12.4, Make 12.4% Work. And they go around collecting data and also supporting companies to make sure that their programs or offerings are disability inclusive and accessible, and also promote the inclusion and employment of young people and graduates with disabilities in their organizations. So as G20 leaders endeavor to bridge this digital divide, I think it's really important. Many of my previous speakers have already mentioned a lot of these recommendations, but I want to reinforce them. It's really important that we design solutions with accessibility needs of persons with disabilities first in mind. And this means adhering to global accessibility standards for web design, for publishing, because this can make a massive difference. We also need to make sure that budgets effectively make provision for assistive technology and related training, and ensure that this forms part of the procurement lists of governments. We also need to focus on training of teachers and training of students alike, to make sure that they are able to use accessible ICT and they're able to use EdTech. So this means we really need to adjust and think about how our pre-service teacher training curriculum and also continuous professional development for teachers. We also need to encourage more research into innovation that improves learning, and to see what has been the impact of using these technologies with students with disabilities and their learning outcomes and life outcomes. And we also need more innovation around improving the language capabilities of a lot of technologies that are around, especially assistive technology. So that can speak Amharic, and I'm not sure if it's able to also do ocular or character recognition or speak out loud, other scripts besides in Indonesia. So, you know, G20 leaders are really faced with a mammoth task of addressing recovery for the pandemic and promoting inclusive development. And accessible ICT, as I said, can be the big game changer for girls and boys with disabilities. It will open up employment, end cycles of poverty, and help them to contribute to the economic development of their countries. So I plead to all of you here, but you know, we as a collective group here, to make sure that the rights of children and youth with disabilities are not forgotten during this digital transformation agenda of the G20. Thank you everybody for listening to me, and I wish you all well.
Okay, thank you very much, Nafisa, for your interesting presentation. Yes, some points that I can highlight from the Nafisa's presentation. That COVID-19 pandemic shows how the shift of offline to online increasingly shows the disparity and the social inequalities. However, during the situation in the COVID-19 pandemic, we can learn some issues. There are many conditions learned from the COVID-19 pandemics that the technology utilization is actually very helpful in some ways. However, there are also some facts that shows that not all people are easy to access the benefit of technology due to the many reasons. But again, it's not only about the matter of infrastructure or technology infrastructure, but also the problem of cultural, the problem of the policy that we need to discuss further. That's why we meet in this webinar to discuss about how to increase or to improve the role of technology in the education on one side, and other side we can discuss more how to improve the participation of a marginalized group to raise their voice regarding their issue, and what can we do from that. All right, thank you for all the speakers that already give very important presentation, important ideas. So we move to the Q&A session. For those who need to to raise some question, you can drop your question in the chat box, and I will read your question. Any question in the chat box? I think I found one question in the chat box, a question from Shirani. So she said, after the presentation, I want the presenter to answer, to describe the term of disability. So what do you mean by the term of disability? The short criteria involved in identifying as disabled. I think this is a question for all the speakers. Maybe we can start from Ibu Dwi. Maybe you can give some ideas regarding this kind of question.
No, Desinta, can I? Yeah, I'm Shirani, and hi,
Okay.
and my question was for Mr. Amit. When he was presenting his one before the last slide, it showed a percentage of 46% of children with disability. So I wanted to know, I thought 46% is a big amount to have children with disability, 46%. That's a big amount. And I wanted to know the criteria, how they calculated the 46%, whether it's hearing disability or even mobility, not having access to internet or things like that. How that 46, how they calculated the 46%. It's about Indonesia. So I wanted to know the criteria. They calculated the 46% of disabled children with disability in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon, for your clarification.
Should I answer, Ibu Desinta?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ibu Sirani, actually that numbers refers to students who are out of schools. Actually, as I mentioned in my presentation, that we have quite a serious problem about how to reach students who live and reside in remote area, and especially those with disabilities. So they are actually, they have a double burden, living in remote area and they are with disabilities. And those figures refers to students with disability who are out of schools, actually. That is my answer, Ibu Sriani.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Bapak Ami. It's grateful that Ami is still here to answer the question from Shirani. Okay, for the participants, maybe if you have a question, you can drop the question in the chat box, or you can unmute your mic and just share your question or your comments. Anyone? Okay, maybe not yet. Okay, maybe I will try to give some question to the speakers. Maybe first of all to Ibu Ami. So I think yeah, you already presented some ideas, yeah, about the gender digital divide and the problem that faced by women and girls in technology, the access, the participation, and the threat that actually women and girls are facing now, especially regarding the, like the online gender-based violence, something like that. And also you raised the issue about that the technology is still considered as the main sword, something like that. maybe based on your experience or based on your, like study, do you have any idea about the what does technology means actually for women or for girls, or based on women or girls experience, or how we can explain if we are asked how to define technology, for example, in the feminist way or in the feminist based perspective, before we talk more about the like the strategic action that we need to raise.
I believe this is question for me, Ibu Desinta.
Yeah.
Okay. First, I would like to also see the missing opportunity that women perhaps in the world of technology, right? We saw the prediction from the calculation from the World Economic Forum about the 60% of growing digitization in the world, in the world's economy, basically, and how women are underrepresented in that. And that is probably the root cause why there are some discrimination in terms of the application and how the technology is being developed. If there are so little women participating in a tech company, in a digital, fast-growing industry, how the product of that industry understands women. This is just an example. Only less than, I think, I could remember the number, around 6 perhaps, or 4 perhaps, 4% of women tech founders in the whole world. They already represent a small number out of the founders, tech founders in the world, right? Only 4% perhaps receive funding that is probably different when the founders are male. Why? Many of this technology are more women friendly, right? And when the capital ventures see the opportunity for the market for this technology, they see whether it reach out both men and women because of the scale, right? Those technology that only cater to several very specific niche based on the needs of women are being somehow left out. Why? Because there is so little technology or application or whatever in technicality it manifested, right? It can be platform, it can be chatbot, it can be many other application of the technology. So imagine if only little products, while women is basically half the population of the world, understand the needs of women. The market is not growing, right? So the situation stuck in this. There are some good example of healthcare industry, right? We can just name like HelloDoc, telemedicine, and all that. But there a subsector of that telemedicine caters for women's maternal health. It is providing diagnostic remotely for women, pregnant women that probably cannot go to the, because of due to many other reasons, cannot be, accessing formal access. But that's only 1.something% of the whole tech industry and the whole telemedicine industry. Why? It's underfunded. It's only niche, but how many pregnant women are there in the whole world? This is something that we need to think about more holistically. This is not only about how we define the technology based on gender preference, but also how the industry see the capital uptake of this industry. Again, seeing from different perspective. If we see whether all the capital investors, most of them are also male, right? So we see this as I'm not trying to say that we should really change the landscape, but not only by changing the percentage, but changing the perspective. There's an interesting recommendation from W20 Italy last year, which is saying like invest on technology that is friendly and supporting, women's need, something like that. So the term for this is gender lens investing. So for investor to see the benefit or the impact of such technology, such digital products from the perspective of gender equality. So this is changing the landscape. That not only changing the numbers and representation, but also the landscape on how investor can mobilize their capital to technology, right? It needs to be changed, as I mentioned in my last presentation, holistically. We cannot just change by the number of women who are probably entering the STEM, but how the industry works, starting little by little and step by step. I think recommendation of, for example, W20, other working group, digital working group, we know we have that already in our current G20 presidency. If we combine them together, it will become a very solid recommendation that can be a game changer for gender equality in digital transformation.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, Ibu Dwi. I think this question is also related to what Dr. Zoe present in your presentation. Maybe you may add some ideas.
Yeah, sure, certainly. So I think it's important to appreciate that technology is not new, and we've always had technology, for thousands of years, and there are different artifacts and levels of technology. But I think that because of the people designing the technology infrastructures are mainly men, they seem to be embedded with gendered affordances. So in terms of the platforms, we can see that certain practices proliferate. So at the individual level of particular women, one of the affordances of social media since around 2010 has been the increasing visibility of women and the opportunities for women to create their own networks and to tell their own stories and to self-present. Now, I think with those opportunities there are limitations. And there's been, a substantial increase in body dysmorphia and problems with anorexia and a rise of plastic surgery. And, in the way that people self-present differs across cultures as well. So, in the way that women choose to present kind of Muslima chic in the Indonesian context or in the Southeast Asian context is slightly different to the Gulf context. And so there are different kind of impacts of the way that people use technology at these individual levels. But what really I think is the particular gender dangers of the platforms are these marketplaces that are growing, and you can see on Facebook and on Instagram and on TikTok the rise of sites trafficking women, and the rise of just providing domestic workers to different contexts, but also women for sale who, from the particular context that they're in, they can present themselves onto these sites and be recruited. And then there are a whole kind of range of dangers. And then in terms of the actual culture of the tech companies such as Facebook, Google, TikTok, there's a whole range of, articles, testifying to the culture of toxic masculinity within those tech companies. And, just recently, there was a big scandal like last week surrounding one of the leaders of TikTok, saying that as a capitalist, he doesn't support the employment of I'm not sure whether it's the employment of pregnant women, but he doesn't, support maternity leave. So I think, that we need to think about the individuals and how they're affected, but also the artifacts and technological designs, the ergonomics and the gendered affordances of those, but then the platforms themselves. And, but ultimately, I think we can't just point our fingers at individual tech companies or tech entrepreneurs like Zuckerberg. It's up to the leaders of each country to come up with policies that regulate the tech companies. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Zoe, for your insight. I think I need to ask one more question to other speakers, but Judith already left. This is about the inclusive education. So I think I will just drop this question to Nafisa, talking about the inclusive education system, as you and Judith mentioned, actually. I'm wondering, like, from where actually we should start actually to develop the inclusive education. For example, based on my experience, or I don't know, maybe this is just my limited experiences regarding the inclusive education. Sometimes there are some schools that claim that their school provide the inclusive curricula or the inclusive education system, but actually they cannot like cover all the student with all kind of like a disability. For example, they can only facilitate those with impairment, physically impairment or the sensory impairment, but they don't have any assistance for the student with the like intellectual impairment, something like that. Or the policy sometimes is just a very partial policy, but when the like the decision maker change, then the policy also get changed, something like that. So what, based on your experience, maybe you can also share, especially like from where actually we can start to develop the inclusive education system, and what kind of criteria and how to make this sustainable.
So, this is a very complicated question, a massive question, actually. Where do we start? And then the reality is that we really need to start with unpacking and unlearning some of these ableist notions, right, about the value of people. And if someone's body functions, or, if they don't see very well or don't hear very well, then they are lesser of a human being, that they have lesser potential and are lesser able to live a good life. And I think that this notion around ableism is something, it's a hard thing to tackle, is to really change our mindsets as individuals, because I think it's a process that every human being has to undergo and go through. And like you say, unlearning is the hardest part. There is, we can have great policies, and we can have a lot of all the great elements in place, but if we don't have a good attitude around it and people and investment around that, I think that won't happen. I think when it comes to schools, schools need to be inclusive from the outset, right? And inclusive it means looking at all the barriers to learning in a setup. And sometimes having a child with a disability in a school is almost a way of showing up what are the shortfalls of the school's practices that are not so inclusive or pro-inclusion. Because if that child is bullied, and there's anyway bullying happening at the school, it's not an inclusive school. If it's a school where people are not allowed to, where the curriculum is too rigid and you're only allowed to show that you've learned something through an examination or a test, that's also not inclusive, because we all have different learning styles and learning and ways to, and that's not been addressed then. So I think that essentially, we really have to look at how teachers are trained and their perception of education and the purpose of education, because I think all of those things contribute to the way we see and accept and welcome and support a child with any kind of barrier in the classroom. And I think that is really fundamental. Coming back to the idea around technology, I think that there's a lot of technology really can make a massive difference for teachers and for schools in many ways, and for pupils that are in school. It can be a massive game changer, but I think that there are not a lot of awareness around that. And sometimes, like you said, there are schools around that say, oh, they will only specialize in certain children because they see their access needs or wanted. They don't have to change much in the way they teach. They don't have to worry about any adapting the textbook or doing any major adaptations. It's not a big inconvenience. So that makes those schools more open to certain disabilities. But I personally, in my practice, I think it's quite helpful for schools who say they are going to open their doors more to students who are deaf and hard of hearing, that they maybe that be the major amount of the majority of kids that they would maybe include in their school would have that disability group, because it's easier to organize support around that. But if you had a mixed bag of array of different students and a high percentage of these students at a school, not like 10%, but over 10%, it will be hard for a teacher to really support those children, especially in class where the class sizes are, in schools that we work in, sometimes up to 120 students in a classroom. So there's a lot of things around the ecosystem we need to change, around our mindset we need to change, and about training, and also how we utilize things that can help in the classroom and not be fearful around that, such as technology.
Thank you very much, Nafisa, for your response. Okay, thank you very much for all the speakers and the participants of today's webinar. Thank you very much, Ibu Herni. Thank you very much, Bapak Ami. Thank you very much, Ibu Dwi, Judith, Dr. Zoe, and Nafisa. I enjoy a lot today's discussion, and on behalf of the team of this webinar, I do apologize for any inconvenience. But before we end, due to the time, we have to end our webinar today. I would like to say the very short closing talking points. So from the discussion, we may conclude that for now, like gender equality, social and disability inclusion issues must be a mainstream focus to improve regulation and practices for a more inclusive society and address the disparities for inclusive growth. And mainstreaming gender and social inclusion issues as a catalyst for change must be done to enable improvement on public policy by giving access for quality evidence for policymakers, as evidence for inclusion and exclusion can help ensure inclusive public policy are designed for equal access to public services, opportunities, and equal rights, especially for women, persons with disability, and other socially excluded groups. And I think one more is very important about how to always provide the special space for the marginalized group, including women, girls, children, and people with disability, to raise their voice as the important or the meaningful insight that can improve the quality of our public policy to be more inclusive. Okay, again, thank you very much for all the participants here, and big thanks as well for all the supporting team on this today webinar. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience, and have a nice day. See you on the next webinar, and bye from now. Thank you.
Thank you.